وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, we got to the point about after the siege, what happened. And what happened is that the Prophet ﷺ, when they conquered Bani Qurayza, as you know, the Bani Qurayza were aligned with Al-Aws, and Bani Nadir was aligned with Al-Khazraj. And the Sayyid, or the liege lord of the Khazraj, was Abdullah bin Ubay. And there was another one, Sa'd ibn Ubadah. But Abdullah ibn Ubay was really, he was the Sayyid of the Al-Khazraj. And he was a munafiq. And he interceded for Bani Nadir. And so the Prophet ﷺ excused them. And they were allowed to move to Khaybar. And some of them went to Syria. When Bani Qurayza betrayed the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet was in a predicament because the Aws did not want the same thing to happen to Bani Qurayza that had happened to Bani Nadir. They did not want them to be killed because it would have looked in the eyes of the Arabs that the Aws were not as strong in their ability to intercede as the Khazraj were with the Prophet ﷺ. And so they were really hoping that the Prophet would be lenient on Bani Qurayza. And the Prophet ﷺ, had he judged, it could have caused some difficulty amongst the Aws. And so what he did, ﷺ, is he asked them, will you be content with your liege lord, your Sayyid, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, to judge, who had been wounded, right, in the Battle of Al-Khandaq. He was shot in the arm and hemorrhaged. And so they agreed, and he asked for Sa'd to be brought to the place of Qurayza, which was not far from Medina. And they brought him in the hadith, actually, which is used as a proof for Qiyam, according to Imam Nawawi. He told the Aws, he said, "Qumu li saydikum," I'll stand for your liege lord. They all stood, helped him off, and he came, and then the Prophet explained the situation. He looked at his people at Aws and he said, are you content with what I judge? And they said yes, because he was their Sayyid. And so he said, I'm in a position, he knew he was going to die. He said, I'm in a position, I can't fear opinions anymore. It's not my concern. And he said, and so my judgment is that they should be killed. And when he said that, they had agreed now to abide by what he judged. The Prophet said, you have judged with what Allah and His Messenger had judged. And so the women and children were spared, and the men were beheaded. So several of the Jews were beheaded. And this was an act of treachery in war, and is acceptable in any civilization's rules of engagement. I mean, even today, if somebody is treason, in times of martial law, treason is punishable by death. And that's what really, it was treason against the state in modern terms. This is what they'd done. And so it shouldn't be any way. The Prophet was the most compassionate of people when compassion was warranted. But when justice was warranted, and an example had to be set, because this relates to the security of his women, his children, and his people, and he's responsible for the city of Medina, right? This is the city-state of Medina. And now, in his book, in Abu Bakr's book, he places Hadithul Ifk after this, but it's actually before it, because it happened at the time of Bani al-Mustalaq, the Ghazwa that we'd looked at before. And this was the Ghazwa, if you remember, when the Ajir of Umar radiallahu anhu begins to fight with one of the Hulafa or confederates of Khazraj. So the Umar his ajir was in the wrong. And what happens is that the Khazraji calls on the Khazraj, what's called istighatha, or Khazrajah, And so they all come, and then Omar's hired servant calls on the Muhajirin. So they all come. So here's this situation where they're confronting each other. And this is Muhajirun and Ansar. This is not an insignificant event. And obviously they just come from a battle. It was a successful battle, and they were probably in good spirits. But despite that, there was a fitna. And this is like, because the nature of Jahiliyyah is it's not simply removed overnight. There's a tarbiyah, there's a process that goes on. And so there were elements, when they heard them istighatha, that was something that they'd grown up with all their lives. They were responding to it. And so they were in a confrontational situation. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ at that point hears about this, and he goes out. Now, at that time, there were already some of the Muhajirin and the Ansar who were more firm, began to try to dispel this trouble. But when the Messenger of Allah came out, assessed the situation, and then he said, leave, this is muntina, this da'wah, jahiliyyah. Leave it, because it's a foul thing that leads to no good. And then they recognized it, and the interesting thing is that they recognized also, the Messenger of Allah and the others, that Omar's man was in the wrong. And so they asked the Khazraj, and he forgave. The man forgave him, and then they forgave him. But Abdullah ibn Ubay, who this is the first time he's gone out on Ghazwa, he and his people, he had a group, they were like a isaba. He had a group of the hypocrites, and they were sitting around, and he hears about what happened. He says, look what's going on. You see what's happening to us? We're losing all our dignity. These muhajirun, if we leave the situation as it stands, before you know it, they're going to be chasing us out of our homes, and it's nothing other than what the Arabs say, "Sammin kalbik ya'kuluk," make your dog fat, which is a serious. I mean, it's using an analogy of something that's foul, a dog, to the best of humanity. And then he says, when we return to Medina, لَأَخْرِجَنَّ الْأَعِزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَذَلُ, when we get back, the a'az. And it's amazing that Allah made him say that. He didn't say, I will chase out. He said, the dignified will chase out the humiliated one. It's not specified. And so he was saying the truth, but he didn't know what he was saying. You see, because the Aziz was the Messenger of Allah, and he was the Dhalil. And that was the reality of the situation. So he was saying the truth without knowing it. And this is an interesting thing that people do. So they go. Now another event happened. Surah Al-Munafiqeen is revealed. But on the way back, the Aisha radiallahu anha had won the Qur'ah. They used to cast lots, and the Prophet, two of his wives went out, Salama and Aisha, on this ghazwa. And she had a hodaj. And a hodaj, on the camel, the hodaj was usually made up of like a frame, a stick frame, and inside it was like a saddle, and then it was strapped onto the camel. And then there was a tent. They still use them. I've seen them. They still use them in West Africa. And then there's a tent and curtains. So the woman inside the hodaj is veiled. Now the Arabs traditionally used to. This was a source of iftikhar for the Arabs. They used to boast, and if we remember when Bani Nadir left, one of the things they did is they opened up the hawadid to show all of their wealth and their ornaments. So this was something the Arabs used to boast about, but it was used in the Jahiliyyah, and this is also the idea of when a woman travels that she should be veiled, right? So in our age it would be like tinted windows, right? You know, it's a good thing to have a hodaj. You know, the women are a harim. They have a hurma in Islam, and so they shouldn't be exposed to the eyes of wolves and things like that. And so this is part of that, you know, where Islam takes the good of a culture that was before it. And that's one of the proofs that ulama use for that, this idea, is that the Prophet maintained that idea of women traveling in the hodaj. And anyway, the hodaj, it's heavy. It's a weighty thing. And Aisha, in the beautiful hadith that she relates in Sahih al-Bukhari, explaining, she had a necklace with some gemstones from Yemen that had been given to her, and she was a young girl, not that young. I mean, she's already different riwayas, but if we take her riwayah when she died, she's probably about 17. If we take the riwayah that she herself transmits in Al-Bukhari, which is stronger, then she was probably about 14 at this point. So she's still a young lady. She's not fully mature. And what happens is she wants her necklace. And there's a different riwayah, but one of them says they actually go and look for it. And the camp, everybody gets stopped, and Abu Bakr's a little upset with his daughter. And they go and they complain, and obviously Abu Bakr's feeling bad. The whole camp stopped, and they need water to do the wudu. Well, this is the point when the ayah of tayammum comes. So they stayed in this place for Aisha's sake to find this necklace, and because the prayer time came, they needed to pray. The ayahs of tayammum came, and they went to Abu Bakr and they said, "This isn't the first gift we've gotten from your family, Abu Bakr." You know, in other words, there's always good in the family of Abu Bakr, the event. So they learn tayammum, the Prophet teaches them, they pray that. Finally they have to leave, and Aisha is going to leave without. When the camel gets up, they find the necklace. It was actually under the camel had descended upon it. They move along, they stop in another place, and what happens is that she goes out to qada al-haja, to go to the bathroom, and this is also, the ulama take it as a proof that a woman does not have to ask permission to do things of necessity, because she didn't ask anybody. She went to do her qada al-haja, and it was dark, and she lost her necklace because it had a loose lock. She was too embarrassed now to tell them again, because they were going to be really upset, but she knew where it was because she had gone. So she went back out. Meanwhile, they move along, the caravan. And when they lifted up her hodaj, they didn't notice anything was different, because she said, "I was very light." And then she said, the women at that time were light. And the ulama take that as what she was doing was removing an aib from herself, because in those days, for a woman to be skinny was an aib. It was an aib of the family, because it meant they weren't being fed properly. And it was an aib because it was not considered comely for a woman to be skinny. And so she said the women of that time, it wasn't just her. So she was letting them know there wasn't a whole lot of food, so we were all skinny. And then they put her on, and they put the hodaj on, and they move along. Well, she comes, and they're gone. Now, what she does is she said, "I went to the place where I was, and I laid down and fell asleep." And the ulama say that one of the wisdoms of this is that there were two things she could have done. She could have taken the dhanni, which is to go out and try to find them, but that's a dhanni. Or she could have taken the qat'i, which is that they would come back to the same place, the last place anyone had seen her. And so this is, the ulama say, the ijtihad of the mu'min, when he makes an analogy, is always to take the qat'i, what is certain, over where there's uncertainty or ambiguity. Right? It's amazing if you think about that. So she had two choices. She could have gone and tried to find the caravan, but there's uncertainty in that. Or she could have stayed, because at a certain point they'll realize, where's Aisha? And then they'll start asking, where's the last place anybody saw her? They'll say, in that place, and they'll go back for her. So she had two choices, and she took, so that's istiswab and ijtihad. Her ijtihad was correct. And then, what happens is, Safwan, who was a very righteous young man, and very handsome, and he had known Aisha before, when she was younger. So Allah set this up. But the Prophet had placed him, he was in the back, making sure, checking for things. So he was a man of amana. Because the Prophet would not have put a man who was not a man of amana in the position that he had placed Safwan in. Safwan comes and he sees, now it's gotten light, he sees this young girl. She doesn't have her hijab on at this point. And she's sleeping. One of the things that also is a gift from Allah for the mu'mineen, whenever they're in a type of faza', Allah gives them a raha and they can go to sleep. And this is what happened at Badr. Because if somebody's really worried, they can't sleep. So Allah gave her a repose and she slept. And what happens is he comes and he sees her. He doesn't know who it is. He sees her lying there, sleeping. And he comes up and she looks up and he recognizes her, immediately diverts his eyes and says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Right? And then he says, Zawj al-Nabi. It's the problem. When he said Zawj al-Nabi, she remembered and quickly pulled down her hijab, because she realized now what's happened. And he knew it was a musibah, because he said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, which is what you say when you have a musibah. Because he saw, this is... And he didn't, because he was such a muttaqi, he didn't even speak one word to her. What are you doing here? He didn't want to engage in conversation, nothing. He turned his back, he pulled down his camel and put his foot on the camel, which is an ishara to ride. So he didn't even have to say irkibi. He just put his foot on the camel, which is what the Arabs do when they want to help somebody get on the camel. So she got up on the camel, and then he stayed in front of her and never once looked back. That's taqwa. It's amazing. Yeah, they would have, like in Syria or some places, they have a flap that they can just flip it over. Or like the chador. I mean, we don't really know exactly how. Some of the hadiths would indicate that it was more like the chador, because like what they wear in Iran and Tunisia, because they would clip them and sometimes hold them in their mouth. So we don't know exactly, but the point is she ghabbat wajhaha, she covered her face. And so he's carrying her, and he comes to the place where the caravan is. Now here's a young, handsome man coming in with the wife of the Prophet from the desert. Right? And for the mu'mineen, there's nothing. There's obviously an explanation. But for those who have diseases in their heart, right? Because the mu'min yaltamis al-udhr, he looks for an excuse. But the munafiq, he looks for the opposite. What are the haram possibilities here? That's what he... So Abdullah bin Ubay, when he saw this, now remember, he's mad about what had happened before. So he's got hiqd in his heart. He's already got this rancor and animosity in his heart. And he says, look what's up here. Safwan, what's he doing with Aisha coming out from the desert? And this begins to spread amongst the hypocrites first. Aisha doesn't hear anything about it. They go back to Medina now, and Aisha becomes ill. She gets sick. And so she's in bed in the house. Now this is starting to spread around Medina. And the people that spread it, right, one of them is Hamna bint Jahsh. Now, the reason that she did it, just being foolish, and she was young and foolish, is that she actually thought this is an opportunity to get favor of her cousin Zainab with the Messenger of Allah. In other words, she saw it as an opportunity to get Aisha out of favor, because everybody knew that Aisha was the favorite wife of the Prophet ﷺ. Even though he did not have any outward in his time and things like that, people knew it was Abu Bakr's daughter. Many things about that. He was commanded in the Wahi to marry, and she was an extraordinary woman, and very beautiful, and all those elements. So she wanted to get. And then another one is Misbah, who's a relative of Aisha. Right? She's a relative of Aisha. He actually, and he was probably, these were believers. Misbah is a Badri, but he was probably very angry because it brought shame also onto, the Taymis who had become Muslim. And then Hassan ibn Thabit, the poet. So these were the believers. The ones that were spreading it, they were secretly spreading it, were the munafiqun and talking about it. And all you have to do is talk about things to put ideas into people's minds. You don't even have to say it happened or not. You can just say, did you hear about such and such? And you're putting that idea out, so it's like a seed that you put out, and then it begins to grow. So meanwhile, Aisha knows nothing. But the Prophet ﷺ is deeply disturbed by the whole event. And moreover, we do not have yet the ahkam related to tuham, to accusations, related to qadhaf, which is to accuse people of adultery and such things. We don't have these ahkam. And there's no doubt, from outward Sharia point of view, this is a shubha. For a young married woman to be alone in the desert with a young unmarried man, that's a shubha from Sharia. And there's a hadith, اجتنبوا مواقع التهم, avoid the places of suspicion. But in this case, Aisha did nothing wrong. She was completely innocent, and she had nothing in her heart whatsoever other than she was, foolish enough to go in the night looking for this thing without telling anybody. And she admits that she was young at that time. She was young. She didn't have that type of maturity. So in the city of Medina now, these people were speaking about this. Now the Messenger of Allah, he passes by Aisha's room. When she used to get ill, he showed incredible compassion and would come and really make her feel good and spend time with her the prior times. This time, because obviously he's troubled and he really doesn't know what's taken place. And there's a lot of shame issues related in the whole situation. This is his wife, it was on a ghazwa, and there's serious problems also within the community. This is a major fitna, and this is what we would call in modern times a scandal. This is a scandal. Right? And scandals initially begin as rumors. That's how scandals initially begin. They begin as rumors. And when you want to attack your enemy, often one of the best ways to attack your enemy is to spread rumors about them. And for a messenger of Allah who is calling people to ethics, to morality, to all of the virtuous qualities, right, then to spread rumors about his own family relating to breaches of the very things that he is preaching, then this is a disaster. So the Messenger of Allah goes in and he passes by a room every day, and he comes in and he says, "Kayfa halukum?" He says it in the plural. How are all of you doing? And he doesn't really give Aisha a lot of attention. She doesn't know what's going on at this point. And part of the reason is nobody told her. And one of the hikmah in that, the wisdom, is that they say that you should not give sick people bad news. because it'll make them even sicker. And she was already physically ill, and so the people were not talking about it. So one day she's feeling a little better, and she's walking out with Mistah, right? And the mother here, she's coming out and she trips on her robe and she says, Ta'isa Mistah. You know, wretched is Mistah. Aisha looks at her and says, Bi'sa ma qulti. What a wretched thing you just said. She said, what a wretched thing you just said. Don't you know he's a Badri? And this is the moment, you know, even if they hear something bad said about somebody, they say, what are you doing? Don't talk bad about people, especially somebody like that. So, you know, reminding. And she said, don't you know what's going on? And she said, no. So she tells her, and Aisha now, she says she can't even believe it. Which is why it's called buhtan. If you say something about somebody that's a complete lie, it's not ghiba. Ghiba, if you hear ghiba about yourself, you just have to say, astaghfirullah. You know, I brought this on myself because I do that stuff, and you know, fadahani nafsi, right? If you hear ghiba, it hurts you, but you have to admit, I'm guilty of it. You know, had I not been guilty of it, this would have. But buhtan is where it has nothing to do with you. So here's a virtuous woman, upright to the most extreme degree. And she's being accused of something. The first she's heard of it, it wouldn't even occur to her. She was an absolutely pure woman. So it wouldn't even occur to her heart. She hears that. She can't believe it. And she begins to weep. She said she wept so much that she thought her liver, because the traditional medicine said the emotions were in the liver, she thought her liver was going to burst. And she also said she couldn't sleep anymore. So now she's getting more and more ill. Meanwhile, the Prophet ﷺ goes, he takes counsel from his family. And this is also an indication that it's a good thing to take counsel from people that you trust. And so he calls Usama bin Zayd, and he calls Sayyidina Ali, who are both young. And he calls them because they've grown up with Aisha. So the people that know Aisha best are her own peers. They're not much older than Aisha. And he asked them, he says to Usama, what do you say? He said, Ya Rasulullah, ahluka, ahluka. This is your family. In other words, this is a woman Allah chose for you. How could there be anything wrong with her? And that was what Osama said. Ahluka, ahluka. Wallahi ma wajadna minha illa khayra. We never knew anything from Aisha except good. And then he asked Ali. And Ali is, he's Hakim. He's also sagacious. He's a warrior, he's a rajul, and he's very strong. Ali says something that was a little harsh. And Aisha, when she heard about that, it actually upset her quite deeply. But he said, Ya Rasulullah, lam yudayiq alayka Allah fi nisa'ik. وَالنِّسَاء سِوَاهَا كَثِيرٌ. Allah has not made this situation concerning women difficult for you. In other words, you can divorce whoever you want, and you can remarry. And he said, and there's a lot of other women. And then he said, Sal jariyatak tasduquka. But ask Barira, the Jariyah, ask her and she'll tell you the truth. So he gives him worldly advice, and then he gives him advice related to the situation. Right? And so the Prophet ﷺ calls this servant in, and he says, tell me about the Aisha. Have you ever seen anything that would make you suspicious of her character?